They didn't ignore you. They just didn't realize how much you were giving. Because you never made it obvious. You didn't announce your love. You didn't ask for attention. You didn't demand to be seen. You loved quietly. Not because your feelings were small, but because you learned that love felt safer. When it didn't ask for too much. You learned early how to stay without taking up space. How to listen longer than you spoke. How to give more than you asked for. You told yourself that real love didn't need noise. That it didn't need explanations. That if it was genuine, it would be felt, eventually. So you waited. You waited in the pauses between messages. In the gaps between conversations. In the moments where you almost said something, and then decided not to. You chose patience over honesty. Understanding over clarity. Silence over risk. And you didn't think of it as self-denial. You thought of it as love. You told yourself you weren't unhappy. And maybe you weren't, at least not all the time. There were moments that felt warm. Moments that felt close. Moments that made the waiting feel worth it. Those moments became your proof. Proof that this meant something. Proof that staying was the right choice. Proof that if you just kept showing up, you wouldn't be invisible forever. You convinced yourself that love didn't need reassurance. That asking questions would make things fragile. That needing more would make you difficult to love. So you became easy. Easy to be around. Easy to rely on. Easy to overlook. You became the one who understood. The one who waited. The one who never made things complicated. And part of you took pride in that. Because being low maintenance felt like strength. Because being calm felt mature. Because being quiet felt safe. But there was something you never said out loud. There was a small, persistent ache that lived beneath all that understanding. The ache of being close, but not held. The ache of being important, but not prioritized. The ache of being someone's comfort, without ever being their choice. You felt it when conversations ended too easily. When your absence went unnoticed. When your presence felt appreciated, but not necessary. And still, you stayed. You stayed because leaving felt dramatic. You stayed because asking for more felt selfish. You stayed because loving quietly felt better than not loving at all. You told yourself this was enough. That love didn't have to be loud. That connection didn't need definition. That being there mattered more than being chosen. So you loved in invisible ways. In the things you remembered, when no one else did. In the patience you practiced, when you could have walked away. In the parts of yourself you slowly folded inward to make room for someone else. And no one warned you that love like this, when left unseen for too long, begins to change shape. Because quiet love doesn't deepen forever. It doesn't grow endlessly stronger. It doesn't stay untouched. It becomes careful, then restrained, then distant even from itself. Not because it disappears, but because it learns how to survive without being acknowledged. And the hardest truth of all, loving quietly doesn't make love purer. It just makes it easier to miss, easier to assume, easier to take for granted, easier to notice only when it's no longer fully there. And sometimes, by the time you are finally noticed, by the time someone finally sees what you've been offering all along, you've already learned how to live without being seen. You didn't love loudly. You loved carefully. You learned how to stay emotionally available, without ever asking for the same in return. You became good at listening. Really listening. Not just to words, but to moods, pauses, silences. You noticed when their tone changed. When their energy shifted. When something was wrong, even before they said it. And when they finally spoke, you made space. You didn't interrupt. You didn't rush them. You didn't redirect the conversation back to yourself. You held their thoughts gently, as if they were fragile things. But when it was your turn, when something sat heavy in your chest, you hesitated. You edited yourself before speaking, softened your feelings, shortened your sentences. You told yourself, it's not that important. I can handle it. They don't need to carry this too. So you carried it alone? You became someone who was easy to love. Because you were easy to ignore. Not in an obvious way. Not cruelly. But quietly. You didn't demand attention. You didn't take up emotional space. You didn't insist on clarity. You were agreeable. Adaptable. Understanding. You told yourself that this made you mature. That love wasn't about needs. It was about patience. So you chose patience over honesty. You agreed to that again. And again. And again. You stayed emotionally present. Even when you felt yourself fading into the background. You stayed when conversations became shorter. When responses came later. When effort felt uneven, but not intentional. You explained it away. They're busy. They're tired. They don't mean to. You learned how to make excuses for them. Before they ever had to. Quiet love became your way of protecting what you felt. You believed that if you didn't pressure it, it would last. That if you didn't question it, it wouldn't break. That if you stayed gentle, you wouldn't scare them away. So you loved in a way that asked for nothing, and hoped everything would still be given. And you didn't think of yourself as someone who was settling. You thought you were being understanding. You thought love meant flexibility. It meant compromise. It meant knowing when to stay quiet. You told yourself that wanting more was a sign of insecurity. That speaking up might ruin what you already had. So you swallowed words that deserved air. You learned how to smile while something inside you waited. There is an invisible kind of exhaustion that comes with loving like this. Not physical tiredness, not emotional outbursts, but the slow fatigue of always being the one who adjusts, the one who bends, the one who reassures, the one who understands. You became the emotional anchor, the safe place, the calm presence. And while they rested there, you stood quietly, holding everything steady. You didn't realize how much work you were doing, until one day, you felt empty in a room that used to feel warm. You noticed how easily they leaned on you, and how rarely they leaned toward you. You noticed how often you showed up, and how little was asked of them. But even then, you didn't stop loving. Because quiet love doesn't leave easily. It stays. It waits. It hopes. You told yourself this was strength. That love wasn't supposed to be loud. That needing reassurance was childish. That asking for more would make you difficult. So you became smaller. Not invisible. Just quieter. You learned how to be present without being fully seen. And that felt safer than risking being rejected out loud. This is the part few people talk about. Quiet love isn't weak. It's protective. It's the love of someone who has learned that speaking up sometimes costs everything. So instead, you loved carefully, thoughtfully, silently, and you hoped, not desperately, not loudly, but patiently, that one day, someone would notice how much room you were holding. If this feels familiar, it's because many people have loved this way. They just never had the words for it. Maybe neither did you. At some point, without realizing when it began, questions started to appear. Not loud questions. Not ones you spoke out loud. Quiet ones. Private ones. Questions you carried with you, while continuing to smile, to listen, to stay. You wondered if you were being understanding, or afraid. Afraid of what would happen if you asked for more. Afraid of what might change if you named what you felt. You told yourself love required patience. But sometimes, late at night, you asked yourself, is this patience, or am I just scared to speak? You wondered what would happen if you stopped being so accommodating. If you asked for reassurance. If you asked to be prioritized. If you asked to be chosen clearly. And each time the thought came, it was followed by another. If I ask for more, will I lose everything? So you stayed quiet, because what you had, even if it was uncertain, felt safer than risking having nothing at all. You tried to convince yourself that love was supposed to feel this way. That uncertainty was part of the process. That closeness didn't always mean clarity. That connection didn't always come with security. You told yourself love wasn't about guarantees, but the question lingered, Is love supposed to feel this fragile? Without noticing it, you began to adjust who you were. Not dramatically, not all at once. But slowly, you stopped sharing certain thoughts. You softened certain feelings. You became more careful with your words. You learned which parts of yourself were welcomed, and which ones created distance. So you edited, you filtered, you adapted, not because you were dishonest, but because you were trying to survive. Inside something you didn't want to lose. Self-silencing became a habit, a strategy, a way of staying connected. Without creating discomfort, you told yourself you were being loyal. That loyalty meant staying steady, staying calm, staying available. But sometimes, very quietly, you wondered if what you called loyalty was really endurance. Endurance of uncertainty, endurance of imbalance, endurance of being the one who always held things together. And still you hoped, not loudly, not desperately, but faithfully. You believed consistency would matter, that showing up would be noticed, that one day someone would look at you and finally understand how much effort had been quietly given. You believed love would reward patience. As time passed, something subtle shifted. You became dependable, reliable, steady, always there. You were the one they turned to when things were heavy, when they needed grounding, when they needed comfort, and you gave it without hesitation. But somewhere along the way, you stopped feeling desired. You were needed, but not pursued, appreciated, but not chosen. You noticed how easy it was for them to rely on you, and how rarely they leaned toward you with the same intention. You noticed how natural it felt for them to receive, and how unfamiliar it felt for you to ask. Still, you didn't resent them. You understood. You always understood. That was part of who you were. Quiet love has a way of reshaping a person, not by breaking them, but by narrowing them. You became the version of yourself that fit best into the space you were given. You were still kind, still caring, still loving, but there were parts of you that stayed unexpressed, parts that waited, parts that hoped, parts that slowly grew tired. You felt the loneliness of being emotionally present while emotionally unseen, of being close but not fully connected, of being known for your reliability rather than your depth. And yet you stayed, because love hadn't disappeared. It was still there, still real, still sincere. It just asked more of you than it gave back. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from loving like this. Not the exhaustion of conflict, not the exhaustion of heartbreak, but the quiet fatigue of holding yourself together so the connection doesn't fall apart. You weren't angry. You weren't bitter. You were just tired. Tired of wondering. Tired of waiting. Tired of hoping quietly. But even in that tiredness, you didn't stop loving. Because quiet love doesn't know how to leave suddenly. It fades slowly, carefully, almost apologetically. And this is where the conflict lived. Not in arguments, not in dramatic moments, but in the space between what you felt and what you allowed yourself to say, between what you gave and what you received, between loving someone deeply and slowly losing yourself in the process. You didn't yet know what would change. You didn't yet know what noticing would cost. You only knew that something inside you was quietly shifting, and that love, the way you had been living it, could not stay the same forever. Something began to change, not because anything dramatic happened, but because you started noticing what had always been there. You didn't wake up one day and decide to love less. You simply began to see more clearly. You started to understand that love was not meant to be proven by how much you could tolerate. That endurance on its own was not intimacy. That staying silent was not the same as being deep. For a long time, you believed sacrifice was the language of love, that giving more would eventually be met with the same care, that if you stayed long enough, steady enough, kind enough, Love would notice. But slowly, gently, a new thought formed. What if love is not meant to hurt this quietly? You realize that silence, when it becomes a habit, doesn't create closeness. It creates distance. Not all at once, but gradually, because unspoken needs don't disappear. They wait. And when they wait too long, they turn into quiet resentment, or quiet grief, or quiet withdrawal. You began to see that sacrifice without reciprocity doesn't make love stronger. It makes it uneven. One person adapts. The other remains comfortable. One person grows careful. The other remains unchanged. And intimacy, real intimacy, cannot survive in that imbalance. This wasn't an accusation. It wasn't anger. It was awareness, the kind that arrives gently and changes everything. You weren't trying to leave. You weren't trying to punish anyone. You were simply beginning to tell the truth to yourself. That love shouldn't require you to disappear. That being chosen shouldn't feel like something you have to earn slowly. That patience is meaningful, but clarity is necessary. This was the shift from endurance to awareness, from waiting to understanding, from hoping something would change to recognizing what hadn't. And in that clarity, something softened inside you. Not your love, but your attachment to the outcome. You started to understand why you loved the way you did. Quietly, carefully, without asking for much. You had learned this kind of love somewhere. Perhaps from loss, where speaking too late cost you everything. Perhaps from absence, where being low maintenance felt safer than being rejected. Perhaps from loving someone once, who left when you asked for more. So you adapted. You learned how to love, without risking abandonment. Quiet love wasn't weakness. It was protection. It was the love of someone who knew how deeply loss could hurt. So you chose safety over expression, consistency over confrontation, patience over vulnerability. And for a long time, that strategy worked. Until it didn't. You began to understand why recognition, when it finally comes, feels so powerful. Because it validates every silent effort, every unseen sacrifice, every moment you chose understanding over honesty. Recognition feels like proof that none of it was wasted. And that's why it can be intoxicating. But recognition that arrives late creates a different kind of imbalance. Because by the time someone finally notices, the person who was loving quietly has already learned how to survive without being seen. They have already adjusted, already adapted, already grown inward. So when acknowledgement finally arrives, it doesn't land where it should have. It lands on someone who is no longer waiting the same way. You didn't yet know what that would mean. You didn't yet know how it would feel when they finally noticed. You only knew that something had shifted. That love could no longer be sustained by silence alone. That clarity had entered the space, and once clarity arrives, nothing can return to the way it was. You were still kind, still loving, still open, but you were no longer invisible to yourself. And that, more than anything, changed the shape of what was coming next. There's a moment, quiet, unannounced, when understanding settles into the body, not as pain, not as relief, but as truth. You realize that love, real love, was never meant to require the slow erasing of yourself. That feeling safe with someone should not come at the cost of feeling smaller. Love that is healthy does not ask you to disappear quietly so it can remain comfortable. It does not ask you to trade clarity for connection or silence for belonging. And with that realization came another. Being seen late does not undo being unseen early. Recognition, when it finally arrives, does not reach back in time and soften all the moments you felt overlooked. It does not rewrite the waiting. It does not restore the parts of you that learned how to survive without reassurance. It only arrives where you are now, and where you were now was different, because by the time they finally noticed your steadiness, your patience, your quiet devotion, you were no longer the same person who had been offering it so freely. You had learned restraint. You had learned detachment. You had learned how to love without leaning all the way in. This was the paradox, the thing no one prepares you for. Sometimes, the moment someone finally sees you is the moment you realize how long you went unseen, and sometimes, being noticed too late hurts more than not being noticed at all. You understood then that recognition is not repair. Being acknowledged does not automatically rebuild trust. Being appreciated does not immediately restore intimacy. Love is not healed by words alone, especially when the silence before them lasted too long. This wasn't bitterness. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. Time that comes when you stop asking love to be something it never was. You didn't hate them. You didn't regret loving them. You simply understood that loving someone does not obligate you to wait forever. There is a maturity in knowing when love has taught you everything it was meant to teach, in recognizing that staying longer will not deepen what has already been revealed, in accepting that connection alone is not enough without reciprocity. So you began to detach, not sharply, not cruelly, but gently. You loosened your grip on expectation. You stopped waiting for proof that love would finally arrive in the way you needed. Detachment wasn't punishment. It was growth. It was choosing peace over persistence. You allowed yourself to feel gratitude without clinging to outcome, grateful for what was real, for what was sincere, for what you learned about yourself through loving deeply and quietly, grateful for the tenderness you were capable of, grateful for the strength it took to stay soft in a situation that never fully held you. And in that gratitude, something settled. You didn't need to prove how much you had loved. You didn't need acknowledgement to validate what you felt. You knew, and that knowing was enough. You understood now that love doesn't fail because it ends. Sometimes it succeeds because it teaches, because it refines you, because it clarifies what you need, because it shows you the difference between being valued and being endured. You didn't close your heart. You simply opened it to a different standard, one where love feels safe, one where love feels mutual, one where love does not require quiet sacrifice to survive. And maybe one day, you will be noticed again, but next time, you will not need to disappear first.
Some people listening to this will recognize this kind of love immediately. They will feel it in their chest, not because it is new, but because it is familiar. They have lived this kind of quiet devotion. They have learned how to stay gentle. They have learned how to love without being loud. And hearing it named will feel like being understood without having to explain. Some people listening will remember this love, not as something painful, but as something formative. A chapter that taught them how deeply they could care, how patient they could be, how much of themselves they were willing to give without certainty. They will remember it with tenderness rather than regret, because it shaped who they became. And some people listening are still living inside this love right now, still holding space, still waiting quietly, still hoping consistency will one day be recognized as devotion. They may not have words for it yet, but something in this story will settle gently in them. Not as urgency, not as pressure, just as permission. Quiet love has always been sincere. It was never foolish. It was never weak. It was built from care, from patience, from the belief that presence mattered. And that belief was not wrong. It was simply incomplete, because love that lasts is not only about sincerity, It is about being seen. Love that truly nourishes does not ask someone to slowly disappear in order to remain connected. It does not require silence as proof of depth. It does not confuse endurance with intimacy. Being noticed should not require you to become smaller first. Being chosen should not arrive only after you have learned how to survive without it. Love can be quiet. Love can be gentle. Love can be calm, but it must also be mutual. The love you gave quietly was real, and the love you deserve will recognize you without needing to be taught how. It will not overlook your presence. It will not arrive too late. It will not need you to erase yourself to belong. Love does not need to be loud, but it must see you. And when it does, you will not need to disappear at all.